December 23rd, 2018. One day before the fateful battle would come, Ryoma Sukuna was currently sitting down on top of a roof, taking in the scenery of the area they'd be fighting in. He had already consumed the remaining fingers that Urame could find, with one of them missing, a finger that he felt was likely that Gojo had hidden on him. Still, he was able to substitute by consuming the remnants of his body. But he hadn't been slacking off during this time, he had been doing some training himself. After all, Gojo Satoru wasn't going to be the only challenge he would face off against. After Gojo was the three people he put as heavy hitters. Yuji Itadori, thanks to his masterful blood manipulation he had access to, he was near certain that Yuji had gotten much stronger over this time. And considering the levels he had grown from that battle with him alone, he was quite curious to see how strong he would be right now. Up next was of course Yuta Akotsu. He had a feeling he would be leading the group. With his immense amount of curse energy that was almost half of his own, as well as the massive amount of curse things he likely had access to through his copy abilities since he had already shown off 2 of them, he knew that Yuta Akotsu would be a threat. And finally among those heavy hitters was Maki, someone who couldn't be sensed whatsoever through curse energy means, and had left behind curse energy completely, reaching the absolute maximum of physical capability. In particular, Sukuna was actually rather excited to fight Maki, mainly because he never fought a heavenly restriction user like that in the past. Up next was Akari, which he had never seen Akari directly, but the fact he was even comparable to Yuta showed him that he might potentially be a threat. Or Akari might also be put with the next group of people that he had in mind. In that group were people he felt were notably strong, but nowhere near as strong as the heavy hitters. Mainly just with Jin and Kyoto, though he also knew thanks to Kenjaku that Kotsuke had been joining up with their group. And based on Kenjaku's words, Kotsuke was more than likely stronger than the 2 of them, so he put her in that same category. The third category was people Sukuna felt it was necessary to feel a bit cautious about. They wouldn't normally be threats to him, but if he let his guard down for even a second, they might be able to find an exploit to beat him, or at least be very annoying for him to have to deal with. In that category, there were only 4 main people, those 4 of course being Aoi Todo, Higuruma, Nobara, and finally Nanako. Aoi Todo would make fighting sorcerers significantly more difficult, especially with even more of them on the field and with his ability to near instantly sync up with Yuji. Pair that up with Higuruma's Executioner Blade and it would make things certainly much more interesting. With Nobara still being around, he was going to have to make sure that any part of his body that did end up falling off would have to be immediately destroyed. He couldn't risk that getting in her hand. And while Nanako was certainly the weakest of them, she still had one capability that would make her much more annoying: her photos. Considering the tactic they both used against Kenjaku as well as against Jogo to make sure the domains were mistimed, it would be very bad against him. Granted, he did also know that the more powerful the opponent was, the more taxing it was on Nanako's body, so there was a pretty good chance that Nanako wouldn't even be able to do it on him, but he still needed to be cautious nonetheless. And then finally, there was Group 4, the worthless fodder. While they were strong, they weren't anywhere near strong enough to be even remotely considered a challenge for him, or something for him to actually look out for, so much so they didn't even feel like listing off their names. But then he sensed something as he looked behind him to see Urame approaching him. As Urame asked Sukuna what exactly was Yuji Itadori. Now of course Urame already knew about the fact that they had all the death paintings infused into his body, that's what allowed him to use all of their abilities. But there was also something else wrong about Yuji. After all, there was no way he should have gotten that much stronger just from Sukuna leaving his body. There was something in Yuji that felt a lot more like Sukuna, which led to Sukuna explaining that Yuji had some blood connection to one of his reincarnations, or well, not his reincarnation, but rather the reincarnation of his twin brother that he ate so long ago, created by Kenjaku in order to become the perfect player for the Culling Games. Jin, Kyoto, as well as Kotsuke were proof that such an experiment was possible, and Yuji was the final result. But that made a terrifying thought enter into Urame, as now they had to question something. Could it be possible that Yuji Itadori has more latent potential than Sukuna due to having the other parts mixed into him? Or maybe those death paintings being mixed in ended up making the mixture impure. Either way, this was something they were going to have to be cautious about. But Sukuna told Urame there was no need to worry about it. After all, they weren't going to be the one to fight Yuji. That would be him. If he does enter onto the field, he doesn't want Urame to interrupt. He was now curious to see how far exactly Yuji would be willing to go. December 24th, the day of the Shinjuku Showdown had arrived, the day to decide everything. Ryoma Sukuna had just finished executing Satoru Gojo, as Hajime Kashimo prepared to face off against the heavily injured Ryoma Sukuna. And right when Urame dropped down Kamutoke for Sukuna, 2 people dropped down into the field: Jin and Akari. A sorcerer with fire capabilities as well as Akari Kinji would be perfect to take on someone like Urame, and Sukuna couldn't help but smirk a little bit to himself as he saw Jin. But then Sukuna's focus returned back to Hajime Kashimo. After all, that was his current opponent, as Akari Kinji opened up his domain, taking himself as well as Urame and Jin inside. And while Urame was caught off guard by the massive burst of information entering into their head, Jin was not. One of the big parts of their training they did, since they knew they would be working together in order to deal with Urame, was Hikari spamming his domain usage on him to make sure that he would be prepared for that information overload. And right as Urame was about to try and launch out an attack at Hikari, suddenly they felt a massive wave of fire rush right towards them. Urame, just at the last moment, was able to create a wall out of ice. But they were able to tell this fire was certainly much stronger in comparison to the last time they saw it back when Sukuna had taken over Megumi's body. Sure, they had never directly felt it, but they could sense it. Not to mention its color. The fact it was a blue flame showed its heat, but Urame wasn't out of the clear yet. As out from that blue fire, Urame looked up and saw Jin rushing right down towards them. A massive amount of blue fire now surrounding their fist. Before they punched down, releasing that massive wave of fire right towards Urame at close range. Urame, just narrowly on time, managed to completely coat their body in ice. Quickly chanting as well to amplify said ice. They wanted to make sure they could take little unnecessary damage as possible. But still, Urame was then skidding backwards. As a confident air filled Jin had one role in this and one role alone, and that was to make sure Urame was going to be defeated. But he was able to see that his training most certainly had paid off. But things were getting even worse for Urame, as suddenly both Jin and Urame began to hear music playing. And Jin smirked a bit as he knew exactly what that music was. Before Hikari's domain completely shattered. Hikari had now activated Jackpot. As Hikari's domain completely broke, allowing Hikari, Jin, and Urame to begin to fall to the ground. In front of them was also two other people who were suddenly teleported in, Higuruma Hiromi as well as Yuji Itadori. And that was both Jin and Hikari's first chance to get a glimpse of the King of Curses. And suddenly the both of them were really thankful that their job was taking out Urame and not Sukuna. As Yuji and Jin exchanged a nod with each other, and Jin wished Yuji the best of luck, as Hikari and Jin both landed a punch right on Urame, sending Urame flying towards another part of the city as both Jin and Hikari chased after them. At the same time that Urame was launched away, Yuji immediately sprouted a pair of blood wings, followed by a secondary pair, immediately activating all four of them right off the bat. While at the same time the faint sound of a heartbeat could be heard. Yuji was now using the upgraded version of Flowing Red Scale that he had created, the in-between burst of Flowing Red Scale Stack and Flowing Red Scale Burst, and now he was using it so much more proficiently in comparison to before. And Sukuna couldn't help but remember when Yuji had used that back when they had battled a month ago, and also when he had used that against Mahito in Shibuya. And Sukuna's eyes also darted over to Higuruma. He was rather curious to see what he was going to be capable of, especially considering he was the first on the field. As Yuji then immediately flapped all four of his wings, releasing a cascade of blood arrows right towards Sukuna. But Sukuna then pointed Kamutoke down, as a massive thunderbolt landed right on the arrows, evaporating each of them without a second thought. But then he sent several large curse energy signatures from behind him, but they weren't from Yuji, no, they were from Meimei. Meimei was trying to use Bird Strike in order to catch them off guard, using the blood arrows as a distraction, but that also didn't work, as Sukuna then waved Kamutoke behind him, using it to launch another massive lightning bolt right down towards all of the crows at once. And while Meimei was slightly disappointed they couldn't land Bird Strike on them, they weren't too surprised. After all, that move wasn't too effective on monsters. But then suddenly Sukuna had sensed that Yuji had now closed the distance, as he immediately started out by trying to land a hard punch right on Sukuna's chest. But a moment before impact, Sukuna suddenly heard the heartbeat increase even further, the true version of Flowing Red Scale Burst. As Yuji's speed and power increased rapidly, just narrowly at the last moment Sukuna was able to block it with his hands. But even with that block, Sukuna ended up feeling a shake through his soul. But that also told Sukuna what Yuji was planning to do. Sukuna knew better than anyone that maintaining the full power of Flowing Red Scale Burst was absolutely impossible. Maintaining at full cost would drain the user of RCT, making them die of a heart attack even with someone like Yuji. So now he was using it at the last moment of attack in order to amplify his speed and power to catch someone off guard. And to think it nearly worked on him. But even more than that, he was now rather confused at what that effect was on his soul. But he didn't have time to focus on that as Yuji began to release a flurry of blows right on Sukuna. With each blow at the last second he activated Flowing Red Scale Burst. He had gotten the hang of it in the 1 month time skip. And Sukuna had to admit he was impressed, as each of the blows were slightly pushing him back. Not by much, of course, but it still was pushing him back a little bit. Though he was still holding back right now because he did want to test this power. Before Yuji then jumped backwards, all four of his blood wings attempted to stab Sukuna at once. But just narrowly at the last moment, Sukuna was able to jump backwards and avoid it. But as he jumped backwards, several blood orbs began to rise around Sukuna, each of them being a supernova with steam coming off, causing a light amount of burn damage to land on Sukuna, before they each began to rapidly explode all around him. But Sukuna did a simple wave of his hands, making a cyclone of slashes land right around his body, dispersing all the steam at once while also slashing away at the blood. But then suddenly Sukuna felt a rope wrap around his arm, as Higuruma reactivated his domain expansion, declaring that they were going to have a retrial. And Sukuna couldn't help but smirk even more widely. Now he was excited. He was excited to see where this was going to go, and more importantly, what type of sorcerer would sprout from Higuruma's potential. As Judgment declared that this court case would be about Itadori Yuji's mass amounts of murder they had committed in Shibuya, with Higuruma declaring that he had evidence that the one who was responsible was Sukuna. And before Higuruma could go on with the rest of this case, Sukuna actually chose to spoke. Don't be so long-winded. I already had heard the rules of the domain, and truth be told, I could care less for this little court case of yours. What I'm more interested in is the sword you wield. A blade with the capability to end anything that gets stabbed by said blade. So, let's hurry this up. I'm guilty. As judgment declared that the punishment that Sukuna would be wielding was confiscation and the death penalty. As all three of them returned back to the normal area, Higuruma now wielding the executioner's sword. Alongside them, a total of 7 sorcerers had landed on the field. Kusakabe, Ino, Panda in his gorilla form, Choso, Kosuke, Kyoto, and finally Hazunoki, all of them landing at the same time. But only Higuruma and Sukuna had realized something. What was confiscated was not Ryoma and Sukuna's technique, but rather the tool that Sukuna was wielding, Kamutoke, as slashes were launched out towards each of the sorcerers coming towards him. As Kusakabe just narrowly managed to stand in front of Higuruma, activating Simple Domain, using it in order to shield Higuruma from some of the slashes, but not all of them. And Sukuna looked around. He had to admit he was rather impressed to see all of their reinforcements increase. Everybody here had taken significantly less damage than he expected, though not just did their reinforcement increase, he also sensed something else. All of them, other than Kyoto, was wearing some type of blood armor that Yuji had produced. They were each wearing it underneath their clothes. And it was at that moment Sukuna had realized something, as he looked towards Yuji and smirked. So you've absorbed your other brothers in order to make you stronger. Well, I'll have to admit that is definitely a good move. After all, they were trashed as combatants. Though a shame you didn't absorb that one, he said as he looked over to Choso, as Kyoto's body repaired itself from the slashes. A rage boiled in Yuji, Choso, Kyoto, and Kosuke. After all, he was now insulting their siblings, which caused Sukuna to smirk even wider, as he said, "At the very least, you've all upped your defenses. Good, good. I'm going to go for your legs next." As the steam emanated from Choso's hands, while he focused his hands together, preparing to fire off a piercing blood, quickly getting a chant off as well in order to amplify a piercing blood to its maximum. As Sukuna smirked and he said, "Actually, let's have a little bit of a race, brat." And the moment Choso fired off that piercing blood, Sukuna vanished from sight. Though as Sukuna was moving towards Choso, he had to admit he was impressed by the speed the piercing blood was moving at. It was nothing too impressive in comparison to him, but it was certainly more impressive than what he was expecting from Choso. Still, he didn't have much interest in Choso. After all, he was just an inferior version of Yuji, as he impaled both of his hands right through Choso's gut. And right when Sukuna tried to throw Choso away, Yuji appeared right on Sukuna's side and attempted to land a hard punch right on his face. At the same time, Kosuke clapped her hands together and fired a potent and strong water arrow right towards his side. Finally, Kyoto quickly moved to catch Choso, skidding back a couple of feet, as he then said,
"Choso, for now you should yield it off and offer some range support as well as set up some traps. We'll handle Stone Sukuna."
With Kyoto moving back in the battle and Choso moving in order to go heal himself properly, as Sukuna lifted up one of his hands in order to block Yuji's blow, while lifting up the other in order to block Kosuke's water. But even with that, the combined blow managed to push Sukuna back by a couple of feet. He was caught off guard and surprised by that sudden burst of power from the both of them. Sure, he could already tell that those two were the strongest currently on the field, but at the same time he could tell their rage was also amplifying them even further. And once he looked over to Kosuke, he could see something interesting. 2 more water arms began to manifest from her back. And Sukuna tilted his head, as he thought to himself, "There's no way they figured out a way to replicate my arms." And he was slightly impressed. After all, he knew better than anybody that having 2 arms and a stomach mouth would give the best advantage towards a sorcerer. Now sure, there was no way they'd be able to figure out a way to make a stomach mouth, but making 2 additional arms was insanely impressive. But then he sensed a curse energy coming down from the sky, that being Ino, wielding the cursed tool of Nanami. Nanami himself was far too injured to continue being a sorcerer, but he decided to give this tool to Ino, considering it a tool of retirement. As Sukuna was able to block the blade, but at the last moment Ratio was activated right on his body. The curse technique of Nanami infused into it after Nanami had so much experience with the blade. But still, Sukuna was able to block it rather casually. But right as Sukuna was about to try and kick Ino, a shadow hand moved up in order to block the blow. Now while it didn't fully stop the blow, it did cushion it a bit in order to prevent some damage on Ino. As 4 more shadow hands rose up and wrapped around Sukuna's arms, trying to hold him down, as Panda rushed right towards him in order to use unblockable drumming beats. The curse energy erupted off of Sukuna as he forcefully moved those shadow hands right off of his body, before dodging the unblockable drumming beat and cutting off both of Panda's arms. As Sukuna then grabbed Panda by the back of the head, while looking right over to Ino, as he said, "You and the brat wielding the 7 free curse tool are by far the weakest links here," before throwing Panda right towards Ino, launching them several, no, tens of feet backwards and through one of the buildings. But right as Sukuna was done doing that, 2 shadow hands rose up from the shadows and grabbed onto Sukuna's arms, while at the same time 2 water hands rose around Sukuna's other side, trying to hold him down and still. As Yuji and Kusakabe both rushed for Sukuna's front, aiming to land an attack right on his body. And at the same time, Higuruma came from behind, aiming to try and stab right through Sukuna. But Sukuna's stomach mouth quickly chanted as he pointed upwards, and a massive wave of slashes was launched all around him, while at the same time Sukuna jumped in the air, before jumping on air again in order to send himself even higher, as all 5 of the fighters were launched backwards and pushed away from each other. But Yuji then clamped his hands together, firing out a piercing blood right towards Sukuna's direction, quickly chanting and changing the shape of his blood wings into arms in order to make hand signs, as it was sent rocketing right towards Sukuna, surpassing even Choso's speed by a significant amount. But Sukuna pointed his hand down, launching a large slash right towards Yuji, the 2 attacks cancelling each other out. Then Sukuna jumped off air again, landing right in front of Higuruma, as he pointed all 4 of his arms backwards, launching slashes right towards all 4 of the other fighters in order to launch them even further away, while at the same time he kicked Higuruma hard in the face. He decided he was going to fight Higuruma one-on-one, but in order to do that for a little bit he needed to make some space proper. Fortunately, 3 of the 4 of them were wearing the blood armor that Yuji had made for them. Kyoto just barely at the last moment was able to dodge it by going into the shadows. But that little distraction was more than enough for Sukuna to start making distance on Higuruma, as all 4 of them went full speed to try and catch up. However, Yuji was making distance on all of them. After all, he was still the fastest out of the 4 of them, which led to Kusakabe stopping both Kotsuke and Kyoto, as he told the both of them they were going to do some setup for some more plans to back up Yuji. Yuji was a bit too fast for them, but if Yuji could catch up first, he would be able to at least hold off Sukuna for a little bit with Higuruma. The 2 of them nodded as Yuji chased right after Sukuna. Higuruma quickly caught himself as he was thrown right into a building, landing on his hand. He near instantly realized he was separated from the others in the group. This wasn't going anywhere near how they planned at all, but Higuruma had to adjust. He had to hold Sukuna in one place, as Sukuna then jumped inside of the building, staring right towards Higuruma, but right before he could rush at him, suddenly he heard the sound of a slicing exorcism coming right towards him, one of a massive amount of steam coming off of it, as Sukuna lifted up both of his hands in order to catch the disc. At the same time, the sound of a potent heartbeat could be heard, as Yuji jumped into the building landing next to Higuruma. While Sukuna threw away the slicing exorcism, Yuji lifted up his own hands. Higuruma was happy that he wasn't going to be alone for this battle, and Yuji knew what his role was going to be: make an opening for Higuruma to land. Yuji then heard a voice in his head call, a familiar one, Tanzo. As Tanzo then said, focus blood to different parts of your body before opening them up. Increase the heat of the blood as well. Allow the steam to fill the room. Imagine yourself like a kettle boiling water, one with so much water it couldn't contain it. And the room suddenly began to fill with a mist, as Sukuna recognized exactly what this technique was. It was an extension technique that worked around the premise of heating up one's own blood. It made it near impossible to sense where the caster was, not because they were cloaking their own curse energy, but because there was so much of their curse energy all across the area that it was impossible to sense their direct location. Unfortunately for Higuruma, he did not have that same protection. But still, Yuji knew that so long as he continued to fight on the field, he could make some openings for him. All they needed was for Higuruma to land it once and they would win. But that caused a smirk to rise on Sukuna, as he then said, "You know, this technique only works well when it's a one-on-one matchup, mainly because of one thing, brat. You're not going to let Higuruma die." As without even trying to search for where Yuji might be, Sukuna instead chose to lift up his hand and launch a massive slash right towards Higuruma's direction. Higuruma had nowhere near enough time to dodge. Yuji did have enough time to get in the way of the attack though, and that was exactly what Sukuna had wanted. As Yuji quickly activated Flowing Red Scale Burst to its full potential, using it instead as a speed boost in order to move in front of the attack and block it for Higuruma. This time it was Kotsuzo's turn in order to guide Yuji on how to make a blood armor as powerful as possible, but as a result that it was strong enough to block most of the damage from the slash, though Yuji did still take some damage that he ended up healing off. But that was enough time for Sukuna to approach Yuji and immediately punch him in the stomach and the face at the same time with 2 of his arms, before grabbing him by the hair and throwing him right out of the building. As Higuruma saw this as his chance, he apologized for not being able to help Yuji, but this was his only chance to do it, as he attempted to rush right past Yuji and try and stab the Executioner blade right into Sukuna. But at the same time, Sukuna opened up both of his hands, as he launched out a wave of slashes right towards both Yuji and Higuruma. Though these wave of slashes weren't too powerful, as it did end up causing some damage on Yuji that he was rather quick to heal off. But Yuji was more worried about Higuruma than anything else, but instead out from the dust they saw something else that they weren't expecting. Higuruma Hiromi had now awakened Domain Amplification, using it to lessen the potency of all the slashes that had landed on his body, and making sure that Domain Amplification did not target his hand. That way the Executioner's sword wouldn't have faded. On display now was a man who had equal talent to Satoru Gojo, and Yuji was completely shocked by this. He wasn't expecting Higuruma to awaken Domain Amplification, but since he did awaken it, he knew he could at least rely a bit more on Higuruma to be able to take some blows. But then Sukuna began to speak as a massive curse energy could be felt from him rumbling. Sukuna's interest had now been piqued, as he said, "Higuruma Hiromi, was it?" Before omnidirectional slashes were launched out, completely destroying the entire city block they were in. as parts of the building began to fall to the ground with Yuji, Higuruma, and Sukuna on top of the rubble. Sukuna decided he was going to make this matchup even more interesting by giving them mobile footing as well as an unstable ground. Higuruma was the first to begin the charge, as he rushed right towards Sukuna, attempting to land a stab right with the executioner blade onto him. But Sukuna was able to flip in the air, as he was about to try and land a punch right on Higuruma's head, until suddenly Yuji intercepted it by punching Sukuna right in the face. And as Sukuna was being launched backwards, 3 supernovas rose up around Sukuna and immediately started to explode. But before the blood could make contact with them, they were suddenly all sliced right apart. However, that was followed up by another attack, as several water bullets began to launch right towards Sukuna from all directions. And Sukuna sent something that caught him off guard. Kosuke's curse energy signature was in 4 separate directions, but Sukuna was able to realize quite fast what that meant. Kosuke was able to create Shikigami that had her capabilities, though to lesser extents, which must have been what Kosuke was doing while Yuji and Higuruma were fighting against Sukuna. As Sukuna then hopped high off of the air several times, using it in order to avoid each of the water bullets coming towards him, before he launched down 4 slashes in each direction, towards each of the Shikigami that were firing at him. And while 3 of the 4 Shikigami were completely destroyed, one of them was just narrowly able to move their core out the way, using it in order to just barely save themselves on time. And that was when Sukuna landed, as suddenly he felt 2 chains wrap around his arms, both completely made out of shadows. When he looked at the distance, he could see Kyoto currently standing there with his hands inside of the shadows, standing on a rooftop nearby saying several chants, trying his best to make sure this would be as strong as possible to give Higuruma one opening. As Higuruma was sent rocketing right towards Sukuna, moving like a torpedo after Yuji launched him right towards him, with Yuji following right behind Higuruma. The goal of this was quite simple, to try and land this final blow. Sadly, there were still some cards Sukuna had kept rather close to his chest, as his stomach mouth started to chant as well, before Sukuna sliced apart all of the chains that were wrapped around his body. Sukuna then jumped backwards, avoiding the blow of that slash coming right towards him, as his smirk continued to increase. He was getting quite a few good memories right now. If he was being honest, he wished Kenjaku made more hybrids, or at least more of the hybrids succeeded in surviving. That would be a lot more fun. Now, he was still having fun right now, but that could be the potential of having even more fun. As Sukuna then rushed right past Higuruma, heading for Yuji's direction. And Yuji attempted to land a punch right on Sukuna's face once more, but Sukuna used one of his arms in order to grab Yuji's hand, while putting the other right onto Yuji's side, as he launched out a massive amount of slashes right towards his gut. He could already see that Yuji's RCT was beginning to work in order to heal that off, but he wasn't going to give Yuji that much time, as he quickly threw Yuji right towards the direction of Kyoto in order to make him leave that fight. As Sukuna then slowly turned his head right towards Higuruma. He saw Higuruma rush right towards him, trying to use this as an opening to land a final attack. Scale of the Dragon, Recoil, Twin Meteors. All before Higuruma could reach him, Sukuna had created the M-Menton hand sign and done the world-cutting slash, launching it right for Higuruma's right side of his body. Higuruma at the last moment was able to hear those chants, as just barely on time was able to move himself slightly out the way, and while he was able to avoid some of the damage, his arm was completely obliterated, as he felt the blood leak out from his arm. On the other arm, he was trying his best to hold up the executioner's sword. And Sukuna slowly began to approach him as he launched out another slice right towards Higuruma's body, aimed for his arm, before launching one right for his leg, as Sukuna then said, "Heal yourself. Go on and try. Is this as far as you can go? Next is your head. You'll need reverse curse technique, you know that, don't you? So give it your best shot. Learn how to heal yourself now, or else this will be the end for you." And as Sukuna was approaching him, suddenly on both sides, a water arrow that was heavily compressed down, as well as a piercing blood that was amplified by chance, were both launched towards Sukuna. One from Yuji and one from Kosuke. But Sukuna's stomach mouth then finished another chant, as a powerful slash was launched out at both of the attacks, cancelling them out. But that was when Higuruma attempted to make his final rush, his final attempt to try and stab at Sukuna, trying to stab right into Sukuna's hand that was currently raised. But once the stab landed, that hand was cut off, as Sukuna then opened up his hand with a soft smirk rising, while at the same time the hand that he had cut off was beginning to heal. "I think I've gotten enough entertainment from you." And as Yuji was flying back right at max speed in order to try and save Higuruma, he arrived a little bit too late. But Higuruma still had one final thing that he could do, as he threw up the executioner blade right towards Yuji, telling Yuji that he entrusts everything to him, as Yuji caught the executioner blade and began to fly at full speed right down towards Sukuna. But Sukuna then jumped backwards, just narrowly avoiding the stab, as the executioner blade faded, while Yuji raised up his hands, preparing to face off against the King of Curses. Even though that attempt didn't work, even though the plan of Higuruma didn't work, they still did get some advantages from this. Yuji was able to land several hits on Sukuna, weakening the connection between Megami and his own soul. But more than that, now Kamutoke was gone as well. He'd no longer be able to shoot lightning down at them, which meant all they had to do now was find a way in order to free Megami. However, that was going to be much easier said than done, as Yuji then began to create a massive amount of blood steam. Now that it was a one-on-one matchup, he was going to take advantage of that, but more importantly, he was doing this for another reason: to give Uyui and Kirara another opening in order to get Higuruma out of here. As Yuji rushed right towards Sukuna, starting to release a flurry of blows, as Sukuna then caught one of Yuji's fists before using that fist to pull him into a smack right on his face. But as Yuji was being launched backwards, he was quick to readjust himself and land on his feet, raising up his arms once more. And when Sukuna looked back towards where Higuruma was, he could see that he was no longer there. He had sent Sukur's energy signatures teleport in order to teleport him out the way, and he realized that Yuji was just a distraction, as around Sukuna 5 supernovas rose out. But Sukuna was quick to hop on air, allowing himself to dodge out of the way of all the supernovas. And as Sukuna was midair, he saw several blood vector lines rushing right towards him, SO now guiding Yuji on how to control each of them. A small ring of blood forming right behind Yuji's back. But Sukuna was quick and nimble even in the air, able to dodge each of the blood vectors coming right towards him as he landed on his feet. However, once Sukuna landed, Yuji noticed something else a little bit different about Sukuna that he wasn't expecting. Sukuna appeared to now be spacing out, as he was remembering back to the words he said towards Kashima when he had killed him, how he lived his life. And he himself hadn't been changed. He knew he was still the exact same person that he was before, so he was trying to figure out what that feeling was that was bothering him. And Sukuna was now wondering if he had changed over the past 1,000 years. Of course, he had fought people in the past that had the same ideal to kill him, that same desire to kill him, who were willing to die as martyrs, but they never affected him in the same way that Yuji did. But he knew exactly what it was. Yuji did have some level of interest to him. Sure, yes, his blood manipulation capabilities were interesting, but there was something he had grown curious about back in Shibuya. He knew Yuji had an unbreakable soul, but at the same time he also felt rage. He felt anger. It was that same anger and rage that had led to the circumstances of today. After all, if Yuji just gave Mahito a fast death rather than the slow death he was aiming to give him, none of this would have happened. But in spite of all of that, he was able to keep his ideals. What bothered Sukuna about Yuji was the fact that he was able to hold on to his ideals, and use nothing but the strength of will and those ideals in order to get stronger. Sukuna believed that his own strength allowed him to no longer be bound by ideals, so seeing someone get stronger through those ideals sickened him. In truth, the main thing that Sukuna had actually wanted was to turn Yuji into another him. To see if Yuji could go down that same path, but it seemed he failed. He somehow managed to hold on to his ideals. As Sukuna then said, "I've decided to take your ideals and mince them to bits." As a star came down from the sky, as it was then a rule had now been added to the culling games. Rule 15, authority to begin the great merger between Tengen and humanity has been transferred to Fushiguro Megami. And that made a worry enter into Yuji's stomach, as he now had to question where exactly was Yuta Akotsu, and where was Aoi Todo. As Sukuna then declared, "I'll start by killing you all. After that, the remaining players in the culling games. Then, I'll complete the merger, and have some fun with the new Tengen." As Kusakabe, Kotsuke, and Kyoto all arrived on the field, each of them prepared in order to fight against Sukuna. Ino was lagging a little bit behind, with Panda being behind even them. Though Panda was now notably in a different form, one that looked like a Triceratops. And Yuji told them they were just going to need to hold off for a little bit longer for Yuta Akotsu to arrive. So long as they did, they would have a much better chance at defeating Ryoma and Sukuna. Which, speaking of, what was delaying the cursed prodigy so heavily? We now head over to the Lake Gosho colony where Kenjaku was currently present. He just had the battle and humorous experience of his life against Takaba. But thanks to some quick planning and maneuvers from a three-way team of Nanako, Todo, and Yuta, they were able to cut off Kenjaku's head. Through Kenjaku's battle against Yuki, they were able to figure out that in order for Kenjaku to cast anti-gravity, it was necessary for him to make a hand sign. Something that Nanako prevented him from doing, and even if she wasn't, there was still Todo and Yuta on the field as well, who was able to help with preventing that ability. But even though Kenjaku's head had now been cut off, he was surprisingly still alive and talking. But the real ace in the hole was Takaba. Takaba made it impossible for Kenjaku to sense the others. He wanted no one to interrupt this performance. And Nanako was taking out a knife. She wanted to be the one to finish off Kenjaku. Kenjaku had killed her sister, and taken the body of her father, disgracing his legacy even more. As Kenjaku then said, "It's a shame to bow out before I finish, but my will be passed on. Though I will say this, Nanako, I wasn't the one who killed your sister. Well, technically it was my control, but I wasn't the one who landed the blow. Though I was hoping I could see my children before I died." As Todo then told him that he barely mattered to his children. Sure, you might have been the one to create them, but they had much more important things to fight against in Sukuna. You were merely an afterthought in their brain. But then suddenly all three of them were caught off guard as Kenjaku's entire body began to shake, and now that Kenjaku's head was disconnected from his body, all of the cursed spirits that he had consumed began to erupt from his body and go on a rampage, distracting Todo, Nanako, and Yuta from Kenjaku and forcing them to have to deal with that rampage, with Yuta releasing Rika in preparation to help him. With the four of them there was no chance that they were going to be able to escape them, but this was still going to be a temporary distraction. However, this wasn't the only part of Kenjaku's plan that he had left, as he said, "I had one more binding vow left in store in case I died. Nanako, you're now going to get a chance proper to get revenge. Once the life leaves my head, Jogo will get all of my curse energy." As he quickly declared the next rule as well, all before they had a chance to react or do something about it, and Nanako quickly threw the blade right towards Kenjaku's head, while at the same time Yuta did the same, the two of them killing Kenjaku. But while Rika was dealing with the massive swarm of cursed spirits, one of them landed in front of Todo, Nanako, and Yuta, one with a large amount of curse energy coming off their body, and one that had a grudge with both Todo and Nanako, this one being Jogo. Sure, if it was just normal Jogo, Yuta would have been able to handle them with no problem, especially with Todo being on the field to help them. But this was now an amplified Jogo, as the three of them prepared to face off against Kenjaku's final curse.